How do you combine these things? Classical education, science, comedy, and theology. Find out today on the Classical Academy podcast. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Classical Academy podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Bueller, and I'm a teacher here at Trinity Classical Academy. One thing I love about teaching is that you have to keep learning. It's hard to be a good teacher without being a good student as well. And my guest today is someone I can fairly describe as a lifelong learner. Dr. Mark Phillips has been a scientist, an Oxford doctorate, a textbook author, and much more. Dr. Phillips is someone that we know here at school as the chair of our Department of Theology and Science. That's a unique name. But he's had many past lives, including being an animal surgeon, a biochemist, a pastor, a missionary, and a professional stand-up comedian. Thanks for being here, Dr. Mark Phillips.
So thrilled, unbelievable.
It's so great to have you. Dr. Phillips, you know, you have a really interesting story, and I just learned about you that you wrote an autobiography.
Yes.
And can you give us the name of it?
Secrets and Lies, My Journey to Enlightenment.
Secrets and Lies. Folks, this is a free plug, okay? He didn't ask us to do this. Just check out this story because, you know, we know you as a teacher and as a member of our faculty, and the students love you, but you really have come a long way through life to be here and to be teaching. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, sure. As a scientist at Vanderbilt University, animal surgery, analytical biochem, I was not a believer, as most scientists were not at the middle into end part of last century. Many are coming around now. We may get to that.
Sure.
But when we started cracking the molecular code, it looked like there was a programmer. Somebody had to design this thing, right? And so when someone designed this, I wanted to know who he, she, or it was. Who was this programmer? And started a 10-year-long search through many, many different religions. Very long story short, I ended up, as any honest objective scientist will, at the foot of the cross, believing in Jesus Christ.
Amazing. So your scientific work was not only a part of that, but even the main catalyst for your search for faith.
Exactly. I wasn't personally involved in the genome research that was going on, but we were all watching it. Because as it unfolded, Francis Crick discovered the structure. He and Watson in Cambridge, they discovered the structure of DNA. Okay. But by the end of the 60s and 70s, we started to see how it functioned. And it functioned, as Bill Gates said, very much like software, only far beyond anything we've ever imagined.
And, you know, my understanding of natural selection is very poor, but the idea that Darwin had in his mind of what was these kind of macro-level structures acting on each other or acting within an environment, right? So he could have never imagined this level of complexity. Oh, yeah.
The cell to Darwin, as Michael Behe, biochemist at Lehigh University, as Michael Behe said, it was a black box to Darwin. Everyone thought in the 18th, 19th, even through the first half of the 20th century, it was a fairly rudimentary bunch of protoplasm. But when we started looking at the irreducible complexity of the cell, and these are terms the students here learn, and we started seeing how DNA works as a computer program, we started realizing it's far more complex than anything Darwin ever imagined.
So, you know, I didn't really let you get too far into your background, sure. But you gave a talk recently at Trinity,
yes.
In our Trinity U lecture series called The Two Greatest Discoveries of the 20th Century. And how does kind of your journey of faith connect to that talk? Or can you walk us through that talk for those who weren't able to hear it?
Sure. These were two things that profoundly affected me in my search for the truth, which, of course, the truth is Jesus Christ. And these two great discoveries are also reflected in the Bible. They're predicted in the Bible. The Bible makes several unique cosmological predictions and claims that the 20th century verified.
Wow.
And these two great discoveries came out of that the universe did indeed have a beginning, and then that it is indeed designed. The universe is designed, and the cellular machinery is designed.
So the beginning of the universe, which for those of us who grew up since that time, that was kind of taught as settled science. That was actually a discovery, you're saying?
Yes, it was a discovery until the early part of the 20th century. The universe was considered static, meaning it always existed. The stuff of the universe, as Carl Sagan said, is all there was, all there is, all there ever will be. And everyone believed that. And so from the very first verse of the Bible, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, ex nihilo est, the creation out of nothing. From that very first verse, modern science was saying, well, we know the Bible's not true. The very first verse says the universe was created. We know it's always been around. But the 20th century disproved that static universe theory, and we came to realize, indeed, there's scientific corroboration, very strong evidence that it had a beginning.
So, I want to be careful with claims that, like, the Bible is trying to do something it's not, right? So you're not saying the Bible is setting out to establish a scientific cosmology, but you're saying that as we study nature, it conforms to these biblical assumptions, these biblical teachings.
Yes, the Bible certainly, it's not a science textbook, but where it discusses cosmology, it's very accurate.
Amazing.
And it makes some very specific claims. The universe had a beginning. The universe is expanding. The Bible actually talks about God spreading out the heavens like a tent curtain. That's exactly how it expands, as if it's on a canvas or a balloon. You can picture a balloon blowing up. The surface of that balloon is the expanding universe. That's exactly how the Bible describes it. The Bible describes the universe in entropy, meaning it's gradually dying. Well, Paul talks about the universal decay. He wasn't an astrophysicist, but he talked about the universe being subject to decay and slavery to decay. The Bible in Revelation 21 talks about a new heavens and new earth because the old heavens, old earth are destroyed. That's exactly what science says is true.
That's amazing. And when you add up all those points of connection, as an atheist or someone who thinks the Bible is purely poetry, that starts to look pretty suspicious. Very suspicious,
because these are specific claims that no other ancient text, religious or secular, make. Even Lucretius, for all of his accuracy about describing the atom and all, it was remarkable, much of his accuracy, but even Lucretius talked about everything coming from these pre-existing seeds, that the universe did not begin out of nothing. Only the Bible makes that claim. And that claim alone is exactly accurate now, scientifically.
Amazing. So the first discovery of the 20th century is the origin or the beginning of the universe.
Yes.
The second one you're saying has to do with the information or the design.
Yes, the design of the universe. There's the design in the universe, and then there are designs within living systems all the way down at the cellular level. Cells are hundreds of thousands of nanomachines. We have thousands of these biochemical reactions, thousands of nanomachines going on and operating and working within every cell at any given moment. Even the simplest cell, like bacteria, archaea, these simplest of cells are not at all simple. They still have this complex DNA coding that goes through this incredible amount of machinery to build proteins, the workhorses of the cell.
So, we talk about like different levels of resolution, right? Like I might have a thought that is an oil painting in my specific field, but I also have these thoughts that are still just crayon drawings, right? About things I don't understand and international commerce or things like that. So it might be like thinking of the cell as a protoplasm and these things. Like that might be like a crayon level drawing. Like you ask me, how does your car work? And I go, the gas goes in the engine and then explodes and then the tires turn.
There you go.
And you go, well, that's nothing like what actually happens. But, this is the level of understanding as you get into organisms that you see. I mean, you're saying thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Thousands.
Thousands of machines working together.
Yes, at any given moment within every cell. We've got 50 to 80 trillion cells in our body. And within each one of those cells, you have 3.1 billion bits of computer information and thousands of molecular machines and biochemical reactions going on at any given moment.
So I know in cognitive science, confirmation bias is like the most proven, the most proven psychological phenomena we have, right? I can convince myself that this piece of evidence confirms my worldview rather than goes against it. We have a kind of a miraculous ability to do that. But suppose I'm looking at all this information and I think the universe isn't designed.
Mm-hmm.
How do I convince myself? How do I talk myself out of it?
Well, there are several ways. One way is to say, well, we know it's not designed because God has not been proven. So you have this circular logic. It's like saying, well, I know the Jaguar is not designed. I know the Ferrari's not designed because I didn't see anybody put this together. So I found it here, and it looks designed, but I didn't see anyone building it, so I'm assuming it's not designed. That's obvious, flawed circular logic, but that's what they do. In the mind of the atheist, which, by the way, is the fastest growing religion in America, is atheism. In the mind of the atheist, God must be proven. And the Christian's role is to demonstrate evidence of a designer and then put the burden on the atheist to explain naturalistically how things are the way they are. They try to flip that and avoid the issue altogether and say, no, until you prove God, I simply look at the universe and say, well, it looks designed, but obviously it's not because God hasn't been proven. So all of these multiple parameters, force of gravity, strong and weak nuclear force, all of these things just happen to come together correctly to allow life on Earth. Why? Well, don't really know, but until they prove God, I have to assume there's a naturalistic explanation.
And of course, the religious experience would be ruled out of court because with the Ferrari example, you could say, oh, well, my uncle is the owner of Ferrari.
Sure.
So I actually know I have been to the factory. I've seen them made. Well, how do I know you're not lying? Right? So
exactly.
That skepticism can go all the way down.
Yes, never mind the billions of people with personal testimony of encounter with the Creator. They're delusional. Like the man who thinks he knows the manager at the Ferrari factory. Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing I love about what you're saying, Dr. Mark Phillips, is you're not breaking down things into divisional lines. There's theology, there's science, there's a little bit of philosophy, my field, history. It's all coming together just to talk about being an open-minded truth seeker and truly that lifelong learner. We're going to wrap up segment 1 there. To learn more about Dr. Phillips' talk, it is on YouTube. You can go to the Trinity Classical Academy website and go to the Trinity U Lecture Series playlist to see his talk and previous talks from years past. So thanks so much, Dr. Phillips. We'll come back for segment 2.
Grandparents of Trinity students, you're invited to Grandparents' Day on Monday, November 11th, 2019. It's also Veterans Day, so military and first responders are invited to attend in uniform and be honored. So grandparents, family, and friends of Trinity, come enjoy a morning of student presentations and classroom visits, followed by a grand brunch and fine arts performances. Check the Trinity website for more.
Welcome back to part 2 of our podcast with Dr. Mark Phillips. Thanks again for being here. Folks, if you are enjoying this podcast, please subscribe on the podcast avenue of your choice and leave us a review. I noticed we got some new reviews, so that's really appreciated. It helps people get the word out. Please share the podcast with any friends, family, fellow teachers, maybe the teachers at the school that you attend if you're not a Trinity family, anyone who could use a friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. Also, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners, what you like, what you want more of. Contact us at podcast@trinityclassicalacademy.com by email or any social media. Look for Classical Academy Podcast. Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for that fascinating tour in segment 1. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the educational side of science. So there's a distinction between applied science, we might say technology, rockets. We had a rocket scientist as a guest
Yes.
on our second episode. And we talked a lot about the value of science as a career, its different applications in computing, things like this. But there's also just a value in knowing, isn't there?
Yes.
Just knowing nature.
Yes, absolutely. Albert Einstein said the most remarkable thing, the most unintelligible thing about the universe is that it is intelligible, meaning it can be understood. He found that to be absolutely remarkable. We take that for granted in the Western world. The Bible talks about the fixed laws of the universe. Only the Bible, ancient text, talks about that. We take those fixed laws for granted, yet it's a remarkable thing that we live on this planet where we can see the rest of the universe. Most of the galaxies, they're all gaseous. You can't see beyond the planets. God has put us on a place where He wants us to observe. He's given us an observation platform. And so the most remarkable thing about the universe is that it's understandable, and God wants us to learn about it.
It's almost like you're in a car or like a glass bottom boat. Like
Yes.
most boats don't have a glass
Yes.
bottom unless they're designed to be able to see into the world of the ocean.
And it's a deliberate design, and it's the same with our planet. And so we teach science in the classical mode as a philosophy. It was originally called natural philosophy.
Philosophy of nature.
Right. Philosophy meaning love of wisdom. This is love of God's wisdom in nature. And that's how it's taught from the classical sense. We tie in the history of science. Modern science is rooted in Christian thought. That is, the early scientists were Christians who believed in a personal, rational God, who therefore created a universe that reflected that aspect of Him. And when He says, "Come, let us reason together," of course, that's talking about salvation. But He also is wanting Himself to be revealed. Romans 1:20 says, "Humans are without excuse by the things that have been made." Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night, the cosmos displays God." And so we approach science from that perspective, seeking to find Him in every aspect.
So is there something... I don't know if this word is the right word, something humanizing, just about knowing about the natural world. Like, does it have to lead to action or even worship, or is it just worth knowing? Like, how would you describe, if a skeptical student says, "Why are we learning all this? I don't want to be a scientist. I want to be an artist, or I want to do, work with my hands," whatever it is.
Sure. I like to tell them football players lift weights to get stronger, depending on what their particular role on the team is, strengthening their legs if they're running back, strengthening their grip if they're wide receivers, etc., etc. And so every discipline in a classical education, you're strengthening your mind. You become a better artist when you study science. You become a better scientist when you study art. You become a better humanities professor if you study math. You become a better math person if you study humanities. These strengthen that the mind, the soul, the psyche of the human being was created by God to learn and to know truth, because all truth is God's truth and reflects Him. And when we see His truth all around us in the natural world, where we peer into the microscope and see the nanomachines in the cell, or peer into the telescope and see the billions of galaxies, we are seeing God's truth, and it's strengthening our very psyche and our ability to do whatever God has endowed us to do, with whatever strengths and talents and gifts He's given us.
That's really amazing stuff. I mean, that's really cool. I want to study more science, just as you talk. And I've never thought of the Earth being this observational deck.
Yeah,
we can
it's the
see
best
out
platform in the universe to see it.
Just light years and light years, just in every direction, really, because it's literally in every direction. So at Trinity, we have this unique thing that I don't know of anywhere else, a department of theology and science. And I think that a lot of what you've been describing about the study of science makes clear this tie into theology. But how do you understand that term, theology and science, and why do we have those combined in one department?
Yes, this is a very deliberate statement. We put theology first because theology is the queen of the disciplines. science, all the disciplines are subject to theology, the queen of disciplines. And we integrate them constantly. This should be done in all Christian schools, but certainly should be done in classical Christian schools, because the very nature of classical education is integrative. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the first book of the Bible, or the very first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then you go into the science that is indeed that prediction that the Bible made. It's a statement of truth, but it's also a prediction about the universe. The very next verse talks about the earth being without form, being pitch black, said, and the earth was void and formless, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And that's describing primordial earth perfectly. It was all water. It was pitch black on the surface of the earth due to the opaque atmosphere. It was void of all life, and there was no land yet, without form. Lands created later. And the order that Genesis follows is the sequential geographical history of the earth. So you're tying in the theology, which reflects God's dominion over his creation, at the same time integrating it with the fact that the Bible's made some very clear statements about how things happened, and it's just so science bears those out. So you integrate the theology and the science there.
So I haven't had a chance to, obviously, to sit in on your classes here at Trinity. I know you teach biology,
yes,
among other things. How much do we work in, the history or the development of science through great Christian thinkers, whether it be medieval thinkers, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, or more contemporary modern thinkers like Francis Crick and some of these guys?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, for instance, the father of modern heredity, Gregor Mendel. He was a priest. He was a monk. He was working in the monastery garden when he came up with his theory of dominant and recessive heredity. This is something the students learn second semester. So we spend some time talking about the fact that theologians and pastors and ministers and priests were often scientists as well. As late as the 20th century, Lemaitre was a priest who also predicted the expansion of the universe.
Amazing.
And so you see constantly those brilliant theologians are very good scientists because they're studying God's natural world. Hence, science is natural philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. The science as natural philosophy, that's something that was amazing to me to learn, that the word scientist was coined, I believe, in the 1850s.
Yes.
As an analogy to an artist, is someone who practices
Correct.
art.
Yes.
And so it's not that we didn't use the word science before that. It's that science was understood to mean any body of knowledge, and it wasn't given, natural philosophy wasn't given this sort of like godlike status that many, in the popular imagination
Yes.
at least, it's given. And so I really think that, one of the things that's inspiring about what you're saying is this integration of all fields, all disciplines, and all levels. We have to be knowers, not just a scientist or a humanities person or a math person,
Right.
knowing as much as we can about this world and about ourselves and about the God
Yes.
who created it.
Very true. I mean, there may be some wonderful practical applications that come out of it, but the goal is to see God's glory. The goal is to see God reflected in what we discover. If we do that, God will take care of the application. He'll provide that.
If there was, let's say there's some other science faculty, listening around the country, possibly around the world. Great thing about podcasts is they have wings. Let's say, what's one big takeaway that you would say, share with another science faculty at a classical school or at a school, any school really, how they can kind of ignite people's imaginations, interest their students, and get them to think about these things?
I think one of the most significant things a science teacher at a classical school can do is communicate by email or however. I do an email every week to the parents and say, ask your students about, and then ... Whatever we've looked at that week, I have tied it in to the character of God. We're doing what's called the translation process right now, how DNA codes for proteins, how they're built by the code in DNA. I write the parents. At the end of this week, I'll write them. Ask your student to share this with you. It strengthens the student's knowledge, it gets the parents involved, and it ignites in them this passion for natural philosophy and how they see God reflected in it.
That's so cool. So parents, if you start, getting emails from your teachers, they listen to this podcast, that's a great tip. Or even on the parent side, they could ask the teacher, hey, can you send me an email once a week, once a month, and tell me how I can engage with my child? Then you're creating stronger family connections. And I know so many of our parents wish they could be learning more and back in school, and they're busy with career and family, and just giving them any little avenue to continue their education is really awesome.
Yes. And I encourage the parents to get involved. Learn. We that's why we have the Trinity U here. Come to those sessions at Trinity U and see what a typical session might look like, or some of the material that your student is learning and how they're learning it. I tell you, it will not be a waste of time. I don't know a single parent who would get involved in Trinity U or ask their student about what they're learning in one of my classes. I've never heard one say, boy, I wish I hadn't done that.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Dr. Mark Phillips, thanks so much for being with us and sharing your thoughts and your passion for theology and science. We really appreciate you.
Been great. Thanks.
All right, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Classical Academy podcast. Thanks for being with us. It's presented by Trinity U and Trinity Classical Academy here in sunny Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist, our audio engineer, Stephen Petrie. Until next time, let's all continue our ongoing education as students of life, growing in wisdom, in virtue, in natural philosophy, and the love of God.